Hello and welcome back to another Python tutorial. We are continuing our exploration of web scraping the SEC. So in our last video, we saw how to take a single company and using their CIK number, we could find all of their filings. And then once we found a particular filing that we were interested in, we could then go into that filings folder and retrieve all the documents that were related to that filing. So this was a very targeted approach to go and get all the financial documents for a particular company related to a particular filing. Now, what if we wanted to do a more broad search? So what if we wanted to go get all the filings for a particular year and a particular quarter? How would that look? And then once we have that information, what do we do with it? In other words, how do we leverage it in order to kind of go and get the next layer of information, which would be the actual financial documents themselves, and parse those ones. So that's what we're going to be covering in today's videos. We're going to see how to go and find all the filings for a particular quarter. And once we have that particular quarter, pulling the files necessary that retrieves all the information related to that particular company's financial documents. So with that being said, I am going to get started. The first thing I do want to throw out here is I am importing just some libraries that we will more than likely use in this tutorial. We're going to have to make requests. We're going to have to build URLs, things along that nature. And so we're going to have to use the libraries that allow us to do that. And then there's going to be certain points where we might have to use Beautiful Soup to parse different pieces of information. And then I've created a nice little function right here. And then this will be obviously uploaded into the GitHub file. But this is just simply making the process of building a URL a little bit faster and consistent. So all it would take is a base URL, like an example below, and then a list of all the components that I want to be part of that URL. And once I feed in that list of components, what it will do is it will output a URL that contains each component separated by a /. And in other words, it just basically makes a valid URL. So this is just going to make the process of making the URL a little bit faster. So that way we don't have to spend too much time, just doing kind of what I would call the busy work in a sense. Okay, so now that I've kind of explained what you're seeing on the actual front page as you're watching the video, we're going to actually jump back over to the SEC's website because obviously before we do any type of scrape, we want to understand the structure of the files and really how do we get access to the information that we need. Okay. The first thing that we have to understand is that the information that we are pursuing can be found on the Edgar search Edgar accessing Edgar data.htm. And I've showed this little web page in the previous video. The only reason it's a very important one is because it does give us an overview of how these directories are set up. And the ones that we're going to be covering today are the index files. And there's really two archives that are related to index files. There's a daily index, which is basically daily indexes filed through the current year, and then full index, which is basically this apparently a bridge between quarterly and daily index. It's basically a compiling of all the particular index files for that particular quarter. Just like in the last video, we can choose how we want that information to be returned back to us. So we can have it as a standard HTML page, which, usually if we're exploring it ourselves, this makes the most sense. But then if we're parsing it, it probably makes more sense to have it as a JSON structure or an XML structure because that will make parsing the information just a little bit easier and more efficient on our end. And so the directory looks very similar. Once you go here, it's going to be archives, Edgar, daily index, and then you're going to see each folder represents a year for that particular filing. And so we can tell that this does go back to 1994, and then it goes up to 2019 at the time of this video. And then if you go into a particular year, say 2018, for example, you will see that there is, again, one quarter for that particular year. So there's 4 quarters in total for any given year. Obviously, if you're going in midway through the year, you're not going to see all 4 quarters. And then each quarter basically has a giant cluster of different index files. And some of these index files are named a little bit differently. So you have company, you have crawler index, and if you keep scrolling down, you have form index, and then we have a master index, a site map, just different files that we can download and leverage if we want. So we can access any of this information. Keep in mind there is a naming convention here. So we have 2018-09-26. So it's just going the month, and then it's going the particular day of that month. So there is a convention behind the naming. It's very important to understand that. Also, if I go back to using the index files, if you go right down here, they're going to talk about the 4 types of indexes that are available. There's a company index. This means it's going to be sorted by the company name. We have a form index. This will be sorted by the form type. A master, which is sorted by the CIK number, and then an XBRL. These contain the different financial files sorted by CIK numbers and so on. In our particular video, we are going to be working only with the master files. The reason we are doing that is because the master file seems to be the only one that has any type of delimiter that we can work with. So this is going to be very important when we go to parse these files. The other ones, it is possible to parse them, but it's going to be a little bit more challenging. The reason why is there's no delimiter. If there's no delimiter, it's going to be very hard to consistently parse our files. And so I will have examples up on the actual document itself that goes into this topic, but for the video purposes, we will only be focusing on the master section. And just to give you an idea of what one of these files looks like, if we go here, you can download it, obviously. And then I already have some that has actually been downloaded, and I put it into a nice little text file. Basically, once you download it, you're going to see it's almost basically like a little table, but each little section is divided by a delimiter. And so all we would do is load this into a pandas byte stream, and we would process it in order to delimit it and get each thing. And so we can see there's a CIK number, a company name, a form type, the date that is related to this particular form, and then the URL to access this form. So this is the cool part. We can get each URL to each particular form, and then I will show you at some point that we actually, if we change this a little bit, we can get the HTML page, which gives us different XML files that will make processing it even easier. So this is the first goal, is to get this file. But now that we have a background, let's get to actual coding it. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a cell below. Apparently I inserted it above, and we'll just move it down. The first thing is we're going to define our base URL. In this situation, I pretty much can take this one right up here and just change it a little bit. All we're going to do is it's archives, Edgar, and then we're just going to change this to daily index. That's all. And so this will be our base URL. So base URL for the daily index files. So now that we have that, we need to make our URL for the particular 2019 year. And so what we're going to do is create the daily index URL for 2019. And so we'll create a new variable. We'll call year URL. This will call our make URL function. And then I'm going to pass through my base URL. And then I'm going to pass through a list. The first one is going to be the 2019 year. And then the second part is just going to be the index.json. So remember, if I add index.json to the end of my URL, I will get back information that is sent in a JSON structure. And so if I run this, I get my little URL. Let's put it in here and see what we get. It should look very familiar. Again, if you saw the other video, all this looks great. And so we can see right here, it's not a lot of information, but there is some. And basically it just tells us that we have a quarter, an href, and then a size for that particular file. So I'm happy so far. We can move forward in the process. Now what we're going to do is we're going to request that URL. So request the 2019 URL, and we're going to store it in a variable called content, and we're going to call our request library. We're going to call the get method, and then we're going to pass through our year URL. And once we have that, we need to decode our content, and so we'll call decoded content equals our old content, but then we're going to call the JSON method. This will create that JSON structure into a dictionary object, which is very easy to traverse. And so this is what we would get back, the dictionary object. Now we need to loop through this dictionary, so loop through the dictionary. And then from here, we're going to basically make more requests. And so it's going to look something like this. For item in decoded content, we're going to go into our directory key, and then we're going to go into our items list. Keep in mind, you do have to spell it correctly because that would have gotten me an error. And then from here, I kind of, again, like to give some feedback for the user. So here we'll just say get the name of the folder. And so we'll say print that little dash line 100 times. And then we'll do print polling URL for quarter. And then I'll put that. And then we'll do dot format. And then we'll do the item dot name, because remember, it is a dictionary. So we're going to say for each item in this list that is just another dictionary, and we want the name key or the name value to be returned back to us. And so then we'll create the quarter URL, and so we'll create a new variable called quarter URL. This will again leverage the make URL function, which will then take our base URL, and then we can just take this little list right here, and really all we're going to do is just add one more element to it. I do have it where it has to be in the particular order, and so it's going to be the year, the quarter, and then we can do the index.json, just so that way it makes it a little bit easier. And then from here, we can pull the content again. So we'll say again, file content equals request dot get. And then what we're going to do is get the quarter URL this time. And then again, we would decode this particular content as well. So we say decoded content equals the file content. And then we call the JSON method because, again, we are expecting it back in a JSON structure. So request URL and decode it. And then from here, I actually will just print out the quarter URL. It's not going to be as fancy as this one up here, but that's okay. And then I do want it to print this again. And then what we're going to do, oh, geez, nope, no, stop. Need to stop for a second. But at this point, let's at least show you what this is. So now we get back a JSON content, which has each file for that particular quarter. And so it's basically the equivalent of going to that particular quarter and then seeing all the files. So it basically, we're just getting each one of these files back to us, and we can see that here's the name of the file, the type, and the href. The name and the href are exactly the same, but this is how the data would come back to us. And so we would say print something like polling files, and then what we would do from here is we say for file in decoded content, it's the same exact structure, so that makes our job a little bit easier. We just go right into that, and then we can say file URL is equal to make URL, the base URL, and then I'm just going to take this one, copy it, put it right there, and then this one would now be the file, and then I want the name back. And then I can say print file URL. Keep in mind, we will get back a lot of files, just so you're aware. So you can tell right here, we are getting back a ton of files. And then every time we click one of those links, it's going to prompt us to download that particular file. Just to kind of reiterate for everyone, so that way they're looking at this and they really understand what's going on. All we did here is we're making the URL for that particular quarter. So all we did is we constructed this URL. That makes sense because we have the same year one, the quarter index.json. That returns this little mess over here, which is another dictionary object, which again has the same structure, directory, and then an items list. And in that item list, there is another dictionary that has a structure like this, which is last modified. We have a name, we have a type, we have an href, and then we have a size for each key in that dictionary. And all I'm doing is I'm looping through each one of those, and I'm just grabbing the name property for the quarter. So I'm taking this quarter one, and then I'm grabbing the file name. That's all I'm doing. So that way I can construct the file URL. And so when I click on these ones, I'm going to be prompted to download these index files. That's all we're doing. And so from here, let's just assume for a second that we had a master URL or something. So basically a master file URL. I am going to clear the contents here because I just want to make sure that it doesn't slow anything down. But I'm going to define a master file URL. So this is a valid file URL. I'm just going to copy it from my my previous tutorial. Okay, and so I'm just going to put this here again for sanity purposes, just so you believe me. I am going to put this in a particular browser, and I want you to show that it will prompt me to download it. Now, as you can tell, I've already downloaded this file, so it doesn't help me an awful lot, but this is just to show you that this is a valid URL. It's kind of like we were pulling it from that big old list that we were seeing populated right up above here. Once we have this URL, what do you think we're going to do? We're just going to make another request. So make a request for that file. We just have to understand what is being sent back to us. And so we're going to say request.get and then file URL. And if I wanted to, I can just actually attach the content method, the content property to the end of this particular line. I could do the same thing up here with JSON. I was just breaking it into two separate ones just so you guys understood kind of what I was doing. But really all I'm saying is just give me the content of that particular request. I will warn you, there is a lot of content sometimes. And so if I was to run this back to you, you will get this massive little old list. And so to kind of show you what that is, it's just a byte stream. And so basically to make it where we don't keep making request after request for the same file, it really makes sense to just dump this into like a text file and then work with that text file to parse it. Or, if you're doing this in a more automated fashion, you just might, parse it as you get the stream in. It's really up to you how you want to approach that. In my case, I'm just going to write it to a text file. So let's write the content to a text file. This way I don't have to keep making the request. And say with open, and then we need a name for this particular file. I just like to use the name that we were using up above. And so we'll just say 041.text. I want to be able to write to it, so I'll put in WB and I'll give it an alias as F, and then I'm going to say F data.write, and then I'm just going to pass the content into there. And so this will create a file for me. I'm going to insert another cell below, and all we're going to do is just open that file again and get the content basically. So this is assuming you had done a mass pull or something like that. So you had downloaded multiple text files, or sorry, multiple IDX files, and now you're at the part where you've got your files, now you're ready to parse them. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to copy this little line right here, and we're going to say let's read the content. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to say with open, I'm going to change this to RB, and then I'm going to store it in a variable called byte data, and then that's going to be equal to f.read, so the read method. And so for sanity purposes, you can clearly tell this is the same exact data. We just wrote it to a file. Now we're reading it again. From here, though, in order to make it something that we can work with, we have to decode it. So decode the byte data. And in this situation, we just call a new variable. We'll call it data. And then we'll say byte data dot decode. And then we have to specify a decoder. I use UTF-8. And then dot split. The reason I'm doing the split is that, see these little double spaces here? I want to split along these particular delimiters because that way I can have an easy way to kind of just get to this section right down here, because this is really where all the data is. I really just don't care about this stuff. So if I just do the split, by 2 spaces, this seems to capture the top portion. I'm going to keep exploring this, and as I kind of find better ways to parse it, I'll kind of pass it along to everybody else. But this is kind of what I've found to be the most efficient at this point. And so from here, all this would give us back is a list. And so we can see that we now have a list of certain things. And so really, again, I want to work with this little section down here. And so what we do is I actually just take my data and I loop through it. So I say for index, and then something like, I don't know, like section or something like that. We can just do item, that's fine. And then we'll say enumerate data, because when we enumerate our list, it's going to have an index and then the item that exists at that particular index. And then now I can search for something in particular, because I notice down here, hey, if you find this particular thing, this is the starting index. So if you find this in your particular item, then you can, I want you to capture that index. And so all I'm doing is I'm saying, if you see this particular little glob of text in any of the items, I want you to record that particular item's index, because that's the starting point. That's basically where I want to start parsing the data. And so I'm just going to store that index. I create it and store it in a variable. I'll call this part finding the starting index. And then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call data, format or slice, or, something different. I don't like to kind of give it the same name. But all I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new variable called data format, and then that's going to equal the old data list. I'm going to go to the start index +1 forward. And then to kind of show you what it looks like at the end of it, now we just have the information that we need to actually parse the information. So now we have the actual raw text. This is the stuff that I was looking for. And so the goal is we're going to go through here. We're going to split these little sections by this particular delimiter. We're going to get rid of these little, where is it? I just saw it like 5 seconds. We're going to get rid of these new line breaks. And then what we're going to do is we're going to store this information in a mini list. And then we'll store that mini list into a master list. And so all I'm doing here is create a new list that I would just say removes the junk, the unnecessary stuff. That's really how you should think about it. It's just removing the junk that we don't need. I'm going to create a new list called master data, and this particular list is going to have a smaller list inside of it. And so we can think as each smaller list in this master list as being a row of this particular data set. So once we've done that, we need to now loop through this data format list. And so again, the convention is I'm going to enumerate it because I will need to keep tabs of my particular parsing as I'm going along. So I'm going to say for index and item in enumerate, I can't spell tonight, and then data format. Once I've done that, we're going to loop through the data list. And from here, now we have to ask a couple questions. And so kind of go along with me. If it doesn't make sense at first, just keep in mind that the data is not perfect. We have to just recognize that sometimes we're going to get back data that's not necessarily clean, and we might have to develop workarounds. I've found that this one works for the most part. I'm not going to say it's perfect and it's going to work for every single file, but at least with the master file one, it seems to be what I would call moderately reliable. And if something does break, I don't have to change it. The first thing I have to recognize is that my first one, basically my first index, I have to change it. And so what does this look like? Like, what does each basically section of this list look like? Well, the first thing you got to recognize is it's not as clean as you would think it is. You actually have these like larger sections that exist in these smaller sections. And so it's really, I would almost say it's a little bit deceiving. And so I'll kind of show you it. It looks like there's only one index in here, but there's actually two. And so it's not this true master list that you're thinking, or it's a master list, but it's not just one glob of information. There's actually two components here. And so we have to treat the first one a little bit different than if we treat the second one. And so we're going to say if the index is 0, so if it's the first one, we're going to create a new variable called cleanitem data that will equal the item that we're on in this particular loop. We're going to replace those new line breaks with basically the delimiter that we currently see in the other sections. And then we're going to split that particular row along that particular delimiter. And so once we've done that, we're good to go. And then just for the first one, we need to kind of reorder it. And so all I do is I take my cleanitem data and I just grab the, I basically go to the 8th one in. So I go 8 in. And then that will kind of set it up where it's setting it up where it's in the right order so I can start slicing it again. And so if I do else, cleanitem data, it's going to basically just be this again. And so to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like, I'm going to print cleanitem data. So now I get this. So a lot kind of easier to work with. I start out with the text one and then so on and so on. This is kind of the important part, is because now we're going to loop through each one of these. We just want to really ask the question is, if we loop through it, if it's a text file, we've kind of found our positioning. And once we found our positioning, we can basically create our mini list. Because now we know that if this is basically the last item in the row. So we can just go back a couple ones and we can find the CIK number, the name, the form type, and then the form date, basically. And so this just comes in handy when we're trying to parse this massive list and create some structure in it. So we're going to say again, for index in each row, we're going to enumerate the clean item data. And then from here, when you find the text file, and so we'll say if dot text in row, then we're going to create a new variable. I call it minilist, and that's going to equal the clean item data, but it's going to be sliced a little bit. And so it's going to be the index minus 4, and then it's going to be the index plus 1. And then from here, just so you can kind of see what we get sent back to us, now we get something that's structured. So now we have these mini lists where the first one is the CIK number, the second one's the name, the third one is the form type, the fourth one is this particular date, and then we get the file URL. So in other words, we've created kind of some structure behind it, and now it kind of makes sense to put this back into the master list. Hopefully that made sense. I know that might have been a little bit confusing, but we just have to understand that we're kind of given this glob of information with this like hidden structure behind it. And really what we're doing is we're splitting along this delimiter. That doesn't fix the entire problem because now they might not be exactly in the same order. But as long as we know we have the text file, we always know that basically the fourth value before it is always a CIK number. So we just take that fact and we just leverage it when we create our mini list. We just say, okay, well, now just slice that clean item data where we start with the CIK number and we end with the text file, and then we're pretty good to go. There's one kind of final thing I would do, which is I'm going to loop through each one of these, where I'm not looping, but basically I'm going to ask the question, well, first, if the length is 0, disregard that list, but if it's not, change this to a URL so that way it's a little bit easier to work with. And so we'll say if len minilist does not equal 0, so if the list does not equal 0 in length, then take that mini list, call the fourth element, and that equals really this URL up here. I just need the archives one, that's all. And then it's going to be plus, all we're doing is we're combining the two strings, the old value. And then we can append, we need to take the master data list, call the append method, and then pass through the mini list. And now from here, let's call the master data list, and then I just want the first 3 elements. So now we get something that's a little bit more structured. So now we have this master list that now has each row inside of it. So we could technically make this even a little bit more structured. In fact, we probably could do it up here if we wanted to. But I think for just simplicity at this point, let's put it in a second step. Yeah, it might not be the most efficient, but at least it kind of makes it even more structured when we want to loop through it. Instead of having to do an index, we can store each one of these rows basically like in a dictionary structure. But this is really what you would get back. You would get this master data list where each of the mini lists is representing a row of data. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert a cell below. And what we're going to do is we're going to loop through the master data set. And we're going to say for index, and we'll give it some kind of new name like document, and enumerate master data. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a dictionary. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a document dictionary. That's going to equal the old one. well, that's just going to equal blank dictionary. And then we're going to start adding the keys, which is the CIK number. And then from here, it would be the document that we're on. And then I want the first element, this one, and this one. And then really, I'm just taking each part of that element. That's all we're doing. And then this one would be the company name. This one would be the form ID. This one would be the date. And then this one, oh, I spelled data, it should be date, should be the file URL. And so this would be 1, this would be 2, this would be 3, and this would be 4. And then I'm going to call my old master data list. We're going to call this particular index that we're on. And now instead of equaling this block of code, I want it to equal the new dictionary that I created. So basically just to override the mini list and put the document dictionary in there. Again, we probably could have done this up here, but for simplicity and to kind of help you guys understand the direction that I'm heading in, you know, I'm just doing it like that. And so once I've done that, I'm going to insert a cell below. I'm going to run this. Okay, no errors. I'm happy. And now let's loop through it again. For the document dictionary in the master data set, what we're going to do, we're going to say, I don't know, if document dictionary form ID equals 10K. I can't remember if this is the data set that has it or not. I think it does, but I can't be positive. There was one I was doing last night and didn't return anything, and I was like, why is that happening? I think this does. Okay, so it works. Beautiful. So now we can easily see all the 10Ks for this particular file. And so what I'll do is I'll also put the company name. I think it's just company, right? No, company name. Okay, and so now we can see like, oh, maybe we want to go see, what's a cool one? These Barclays Dry Rock Issuance Trust. That doesn't sound exciting. Ticket Core. That sounds cool. Ticket Core, here we go. So now we get a wonderful text file back that is just everything for that particular 10K document. I'm not going to say this is the easiest to parse, but I'll show you that now with this little file that we have, we actually can leverage it a little bit differently than maybe it was intended to be, but we can actually get to a particular folder that has a particular file that has the underlying structure of that folder, and that will make parsing 10 times easier. So that is for the next video though. However, I think I've showed enough information for everyone for one given video. But just to recap, I'm going to go over just the main points again. All we did in this video is instead of basically grabbing a particular company's filing documents, now we went to a more broad filter. So now we started working with the daily indexed endpoint. With the daily index endpoint, we get all the filings that were done for a particular day of that year. The structure behind the URL is as follows. You got to give me a year, because if you give me a year, now I can go and actually get those particular documents. So say, for example, I wanted the documents related to a particular quarter inside of 2019. Well, first you give me the year. That will take me to this particular file. Keep in mind, if we add index.json to the end of this, we get a more structured data set back to us. And then now that we've been given a year, you got to give me a quarter. And then we get all the filings that were done for that particular quarter. We get the year, the month, and the day. And so if you go down, you're going to see all the files that were submitted. They are different files, but they're just basically sorted in a different manner. Once we have that, now we can download each individual file. And so basically that got us right up to here. We took a file URL, we requested it, we got the content, and then we recognized that the content is just a byte stream. So we wrote that byte stream to a text file. This way we didn't have to keep making a request for the same file. This kind of helps ease the burden on the server. We kind of want to be responsible scrapers in that regard. But once you've done the request, just write the content to a text file and then play with that text file. This way I don't have to keep making requests. Once we open that text file, we realize that, okay, it's not the cleanest data set, but it's workable. We just have to understand the structure of it. I kind of took it upon myself to understand the structure. You guys might be going, how did he know that it was double space? That just comes from my experience. That just comes from me looking at data sets and saying, okay, that seems like a good direction to go down. I found this one was a good starting point. It got me a certain way there. And then I also found that, okay, it seemed like it's relatively consistent where if I can find this little sucker right here, that gives me the starting point of the actual data set that I want. So if you're asking, how the hell did Alex know this? Part of it is just experience. Part of it was just me playing around. I had to look at the data set a little bit and I had to look at different examples and I had to ask, which one seems the most likely to work out for everybody? This was just, in my opinion, the one that works. Obviously, if you have a better one, please share it. I'm all open to improvement, trust me. And then once I had my starting index, I didn't want all the junk, so I sliced my data set again. And then I really got to the core of it, which was now we had to actually clean the data. And all we had to understand is that we had these big sections. Well, basically what we did is we had these two big sections. We were going to loop through each one of those big sections. And then we had to basically take each item and split it along the delimiter. And then naturally people will ask, well, how did you know the first item was wrong? I did it a couple times and the first item was always wrong. So it just kind of gave me this opinion that, okay, it seems like the first item's wrong in a lot of them, so I'm just going to assume that going forward. All I was doing in the first one was basically taking the same step, but then I restructured it a little bit so that way I got rid of some unnecessary ones and it would actually start at like a new clean data set. So really this was, again, just making sure that I was starting at the actual data and none of the junk before it. Otherwise, if it wasn't the first item, it's really actually just, it's just doing it regularly. And then I looped through each one of those items themselves. And so then I started going through and looping through each row. And once I had that, then I could actually create these mini lists that was more functional to work with, basically, at the end of the day. And then from here, we created a dictionary object, and then we created basically we looped through that dictionary object to create the items that we needed to. So if you have any questions about what I covered in today's video, please put them down in the comments below. I want to make sure that I can hopefully get them answered for you. Also, if you could make sure to like the video, we appreciate the support, and so glad to see it. And then also, if you're not already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so that way you get regular updates as we release new videos. So thank you again for watching, everybody. We will see you in the next video of this series where we actually go and parse different financial documents. So that's where the fun stuff comes, right? Because now we can get the data. So we'll see you in the next video.